Well, as we get into things this morning, we're going to be picking up in 1 Kings chapter 19, beginning at verse 3. And we read there, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. The Lord said, Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said to him, Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. Kind of get a little bit of background of what's going on here. This is immediately following the events that took place on Mount Carmel, where Elijah had brought together all of the prophets of Baal in the presence of the people, and he basically issued the challenge. He says, we're going to build two altars here. This one's going to be for Baal, and this one's going to be for the Lord God Almighty. And what we're going to do is we are going to pray, and we're going to find out who is the true God, because the true God will destroy and send fire upon the sacrifice. And so he had the prophets of Baal set theirs up first. And he said, now pray to your God. And they began to pray and pray and pray. They began to cry out. They began to dance around. They began to cut themselves with knives, trying to get their God to respond. And the whole time, Elijah's there mocking them. Well, maybe he's asleep. Maybe he had to go relieve himself somewhere. Well, where is he? Where is this great God of yours? All day, they have been trying to get their God, Baal, to accept the sacrifice and burn it. And finally, as evening comes, Elijah basically says, okay, now it's my turn. He sets the sacrifice on the altar after the wood has been put in place. You can imagine everybody looking on. He says, we're not done yet. Dig a ditch around it. Now, pour water over the sacrifice. Oh, I don't see anything in the ditch yet. More water. Keep pouring water on until the ditch is filled up. And the one short prayer, Elijah prays. And fire comes from heaven. And not only does it burn up the sacrifice, it burns up the altar and laps up the water, leaving nothing behind. And at that, Elijah turned to the people and said, execute them, pointing to all of the prophets of Baal. And they wiped them out. And as soon as word got back to Jezebel as to what had happened, she sends word to Elijah and says, I'm going to kill you the same way you killed them. And so he runs. So you see, Elijah is running because, if you would, Jezebel sent Elijah a death threat in response to Elijah killing the prophets of Baal. And so he hits the road. Total 41 days journey. One day, and then he travels one day, and then he stops. And then notice, it's interesting. There's some interesting parallels that take place throughout the Scriptures. After he's been refreshed, Scripture says then he begins to travel for 40 days and 40 nights. And the idea is he's fasting the whole time. There's no food. That's why the angel wanted him to get his strength up, because you've got a long way to go and you're not taking any food with you. Kind of like we've talked about before. Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. There seems to be a pattern of God's people, leaders of His people, being able to fast for these long periods of time. But so after that first day and he's refreshed, he takes on the journey 40 more days to Horeb. We also know it as Mount Sinai. One of the things I want you to keep in mind, if you were to look at a map, there's no possible way the traditional Mount Sinai can be Mount Sinai. No possible way. Because if you follow the path, that's got them coming to Mount Sinai before they cross the Red Sea. Not after. So, Mount Sinai is somewhere in Midian. 40 days journey from where Elijah is at. And as we look at what's taking place, as Elijah has come to the cave, and the reason he's running and everything that's going on, we begin to understand, if you would, Elijah is feeling like he is the only one zealous for God. Twice he said, there's no one else. I'm the only one left. Everybody else has abandoned you. And even though the people had joined with him in slaughtering and wiping out the prophets of Baal, they had also been, prior to that, worshiping Baal. And so, as he looks over the whole situation, even though that took place on Mount Carmel, if you would, Elijah thought he was the only one who had not bowed down to the idols. Yeah, they killed the prophets, but they had been bowing down to the idol before. And so self-pity is brought on by fear. You can kind of picture it in your mind. You can almost hear it in the tone of his voice as he is explaining to the angel and then later on to God exactly how he's feeling. You can sense the self-pity there, as he's basically in so many words saying, woe is me. I'm the only one left. It's just me, Lord. I'm the only one that's faithful to you. Just me against everyone else. See, he understood. The people are wishy-washy. They follow whoever seems to be in control at the time. They are very easily turned. You see that throughout the history of Judah and Israel. That when a good king comes along, they follow God. When a bad king comes along, they follow the idols. They're wishy-washy. Their commitment to God is not something that is personal. They see it more on a national level, and so they follow whoever is in charge. And so twice Elijah pours out his complaint. I'm the only one left. I'm the only one who's been zealous for you. Just me. Woe is me. Everybody's after me now. They want to kill me. Little old me. And what's God say? if you would, go back. You're not alone. Try and imagine the first words coming from God, go back the way you came, and how Elijah must have initially felt. Huh? I wonder if maybe the first things that crossed his mind were perhaps what probably was going through Moses' mind when God said, I'm sending you to Egypt. Where? They want to kill me there. You want me to go back there? They're waiting there to kill me. But then God makes it very plain that He is going to deal with the situation through people, specifically through Hazael, Jehu, and Elisha. So go back. You're not alone. And by the way, if you would, there are 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal. See, Elijah thinks he's the only one in all the land that has not bowed down to the idols, and God's saying, oh, no. I've got 7,000 that have been faithful, that have refused to bow down. You are not alone in your faith and commitment to me. Go back. You know, many times we feel like Elijah. I'm sure many times people look around at what's going on amongst their circle of friends. Sometimes those are the ones that make us feel like we're the only ones, like we're alone. Sometimes even in our family gatherings, we feel like nobody else gets it. Nobody else sees it. Is it just me? Particularly when our kids grow up to be teens. Oh my goodness. You begin to wonder, what in the world have I got to do to get through them? Why can't they see this? What is it that is blinding them to what I'm trying to tell them? And you feel like you're alone in the situation. Sometimes even in our congregations, perhaps, in the churches across the country and around the world, I'm sure there are people just, they look around and they ask themselves, well, why aren't people understanding what's going on, what people are trying to tell them? Why aren't they grasping what's going on spiritually in the world today? Why aren't they getting it? Am I the only one? Feels like no one else understands. I think lately a lot of God's people in this nation have begun to feel that way. Feeling like, what's happening to the church? Why is no one faithful anymore? As they see some of the stuff that churches are bringing in that is very plainly not of God. And they begin to wonder, are we the only ones that get it? But one of the things that we need to understand is, if you would, we are not alone. God has always had a remnant. God has always had those who have remained faithful throughout time. And we need to understand that while we look around and we may see what's going on and we may think to ourselves, doesn't anybody else get it? Rest assured, there is. They do. Other believers see the same things we do. Other believers are seeing what's going on in our communities and our nations and how they're going down the tubes, and the public is in general just doesn't get it. But believers do. So we look around, we begin to understand that one of the reasons that the general public doesn't understand what's going on is they think that somehow government can solve the problems we're facing. But the reality is, if you would, only Jesus can solve the problems we face. He is the only one who can provide the answers. They don't get it. This nation, if you would, has been on the road away from Christian faith, and that is why we are seeing it on the brink of self-destruction. Because we have drifted away from God. And the general public doesn't get it because they've got no interest in God. They've got no interest in the things of God. They are not familiar with the things in the Scriptures where God has told us this is what's coming. And all of the politicking in the world will not fix it. Isn't going to happen. The only way to fix our problems is to lead those around us back to God, to help them find their way home to the arms of the Father, to help them get into the Scriptures so that then they'll begin to understand what's going on, that what we are facing in the world and in this nation today is a spiritual war. A spiritual war that began in the garden and is continuing on until the end of time. And once people are brought to Christ and they understand that, then they will begin to understand what is going on in the world today as we see it being divided between faithful and unfaithful. There is a war. It is a spiritual war. And I will guarantee you that there will be times that we will want to run and hide just like Elijah. And we'll feel like we are the only ones that are faithful to God. But God's directive is, if you would, don't give up. Proclaim the truth. Share the gospel. Make it our goal to have a harvest for Christ. And sometimes that's hard to do, to not give up. Sometimes we look around at situations, we walk away shaking our heads, throw up our hands and say, what else can I do? But God does not want us to give up. He wants us to keep proclaiming the truth. He wants us to keep growing the kingdom and bringing people to Christ so that they will begin to understand what's going on. And remember, through all of this, we are not alone. Other Christians are realizing we have to step up and get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing. I like what a minister we had many years ago back in Cincinnati said. He said, we got to get back to making the main thing the main thing. And that's Jesus Christ. All of these side issues that churches are getting pulled off on, they are not the main thing. The main thing is Jesus Christ crucified, buried, raised again. And that He is the way to find peace. He is the way to find solutions to the problems that we are facing. And there are other Christians realizing that we've got to get back to doing this, and they're working in their communities to lead those around them to Christ. And I think one of the big things we need to do, we talk about sharing the gospel message. We talk about that a lot. I think a lot of churches do. Share the gospel message, share the gospel message, share the gospel message. But I think there's a key to it. And that is, if you would, we need to deliver the gospel message with conviction and love. What's that mean? That means that when we're delivering the gospel message, it's not just in our words. They need to see that we are committed to Christ. They need to see that we are convicted of the things that Christ has told us. And they need to see that we are faithful. And not only that, we need to begin to expect results from our own labors as individuals and not the labors of others. I think too often we have a tendency to not believe in the power of the gospel message. But we need to understand something. It is the most powerful message on the face of the earth. The gospel message. It is a message that has the power to change lives. And when we share that gospel message, we need to share it with that conviction that this is the most powerful message, the most important message that we could ever deliver to anyone. Something I saw posted online just the last couple of days. Hadn't seen it before, but I love it. So there are those that say the cost of following Jesus is just too much. But the cost of dying without Jesus is much higher. think it's tough following Jesus? Well, it is. It's not easy. But it's going to be a whole lot tougher if you die without Him. Christ never promised that once we come to Him and once we give our lives to Him that all of a sudden life is going to get easy. As a matter of fact, He says it's probably going to get a whole lot tougher. You can expect to be abused. You can expect to be arrested. You can expect to be tortured. You can expect to be put to death. You can expect to be treated the way I've been treated, if He was to sit down and be honest with us. But we need to begin to expect results from our own labors. I think one of the things that comes across very plainly to people, and that is, if we don't expect results, then apparently we don't believe the message is all that powerful. Apparently we don't believe the message is that important if we don't expect results. We need to understand that when we stand before the Lord, He will not be concerned about what someone else did or did not do to help His kingdom grow. I'm not going to give an account for you. You're not going to give an account for me. He's going to look at me and He's going to say, Brent, what did you do to help the kingdom grow? You know, one of the big things right now is when we're confronted with a question like that is, well, so-and-so and such, and God's going, no, I'm not asking about them. I'll deal with them later. Right now, I'm dealing with you. What did you do? Had the most powerful message on the face of the earth. What did you do with it? Did you hide it? Did you tuck it away somewhere? Or did you share it? And did you expect results? Did you share it with conviction? Because like I said, if you would, we will each have to give an account for our own actions or the lack thereof. I mean, we talk about how bad things are getting. I mean, Christians all over the place are talking about it. Oh, things are getting terrible. Well, they said in the last days it's going to be like this and blah 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 blah. We're talking about it. We talk about what we need to do. And we talk. And we talk. And quite honestly, one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in spiritually in this nation today is too many Christians have been doing a lot of talking but not much doing. We talk about what we need to do. We talk about how we need to bring people to Christ. And we talk about it. It's time to start doing. Evangelizing the community around us. And there's no pleasant way to put this, okay? There's no pleasant way to put it. God expects each of us to be actively involved in evangelism, reaching those we come in contact with each day. It's an expectation, not a suggestion. Not a, well, if you feel like it. It's an expectation. The command Jesus gave was not, well, if you ever get around to it, you might win somebody to Christ. No, He said, go, make disciples. Do it, was His command. Let me ask you this. Who can you begin to reach out to this week? Is there somebody that on your list of friends that you could start talking to, start sharing that message with? Maybe there's someone on that list you've been telling yourself that you need to talk to them. But for some reason, every time there's an opportunity, well, maybe next time. Let me ask you a really tough question. How guilty will you feel if you wait until it's too late? I've said it before and I'll say it again if you would. We may not be able to take our possessions with us, but we can take our friends and families, those we love and hold dear. We can take them with us to heaven. And God will give us the courage to talk with them if we ask Him to. He will give us the words. He will guide us. He will be there with us. So let me ask you again, who can you begin to reach out to this week? It might be reaching out and bringing back someone who's drifted away. Or it might be reaching someone who has never given their life to Christ. I mean, there's a little side note I want to slip in here. One of the things that you're hearing out in Christendom today, which is very, very, very much not biblical, and that is we are never called to accept Christ. Christ doesn't need our acceptance. We need His acceptance. We're called to give our lives to Christ, not accept Him. Well, Lord, let's go through a trial period here and see if you work out. No. Christ isn't the one on trial. Christ isn't the one that needs to be accepted. We're the ones that need to be accepted by Him, and we're accepted by Him by giving our lives to Him full-heartedly, totally, 100%. Of course, you might say, well, Brent, you don't understand. I can't talk to people, or I don't know enough, or and we have a long list of excuses that we can insert in there. Let me challenge you this week to read Exodus chapters 3 and 4, and you'll probably find your excuse listed there. And once you find your excuse or some variation of it, what was God's reply? That was one. The I can't talk thing. That was one of Moses' first excuses. Oh, I can't talk. God said, "You're going." Not an acceptable excuse. And I can pretty much guarantee, I think that's one of the reasons that conversation is there for our benefit, is so that we can go down through there and we can see all of our own personal excuses and everything that Moses had to say to God. One way or another, every excuse that any of us has ever come up with is covered in those 2 chapters, as Moses argued with God as to why he could not go back to Egypt. I think the following piece by Jim Ayers is a sadly accurate description of the church in America today. It's entitled, "The Mortal, the Swamp, and the Christians." The nasty old swamp was a pretty good swamp as swamps go. He had everything a swamp could ask for, lots of muck, quicksand in all the strategic places, slippery paths lined with dead trees, and, of course, stagnant water. And how he stank. One day the swamp was just sitting there bubbling methane when a mortal went by. Thought the swamp. But that's all he thought. Mortals were always going by. So the swamp settled down and bubbled some more. He hadn't bubbled long, however, when the mortal passed by again, and again, and still again. This is getting monotonous, thought the swamp. Obviously, the poor mortal was lost and going in circles. Noticing that his marsh gas supply was running low and having built up quite a taste for delicate, sweet mortals, the swamp decided it was a good time to replenish his supply. So the swamp set about the delicious task of swallowing a mortal. He had done it dozens of times. He just tipped one of the paths slightly and let the mortal slip into the muck. Then he'd settle back and let the mortal turn into swamp gas. It was easy as that. The next time the mortal passed, the swamp followed the plan, and shloop, into the muck slipped the mortal. This mortal wasn't willing to die without a fight, though. He began screaming and grabbing for branches and logs. But the swamp was an old hand at mortals. He had picked a place of no escape. Meanwhile, at the edge of the swamp on a sunny knoll, a small group of Christians busily fanned a little campfire under a big pot of theology. They'd been trying all day to come up with some new recipes. Tired of the old staples, they wanted something exciting and new for their dishes. Lazily leaning against a maple while reading his recipe book, one Christian thought he heard a schloop and then a scream for help. He mumbled to himself. Sounds like someone has fallen into the swamp. He walked over and looked into the swamp. Spying the struggling mortal, he ran back to the group shouting, "Someone has fallen into the swamp!" All the Christians ran to see. "Yep, sure looks like someone has fallen into the swamp," they exclaimed. Then they gathered in a circle and began a heated discussion. Some said one thing and others said another, and pretty soon they voted, and the leader rose and said, "We have agreed that someone has fallen into the swamp." Everyone cheered. That was their first agreement of the day. How exciting! They all settled down to search the recipe books to see whether there was any reference to mortals falling into the swamp. After a few minutes, one Christian shouted, "I found it! Hodon 5:12 says, 3 years after opening of the 5th ivy leaf, a mortal shall fall into the swamp." And all the Christians checked their history books and hourglasses, and sure enough, it was the 3rd year after the opening of the 15th ivy leaf, and they shouted for joy. They had settled back to discuss the implications of this amazing prophecy. After a few minutes, someone suggested, "Why don't we help the poor mortal?" So once again, all the Christians huddled to discuss the new idea. And after they voted, the leader stood and announced, "We have voted and decided that we should study our recipe books and discover whether helping the mortal is a part of our creed." So they settled down again. And after several minutes of monotonous mumbling punctuated by furiously flapping pages, another Christian cried, "Here it is, Evangelion 3:11. All Christians must help other mortals who fall into the swamps." Everyone voted excitedly, and then the leader declared, "In the light of the evidence, we must strive to help this poor mortal who is sinking in the swamp." After that, everyone ran to the edge of the swamp and began thinking of ways of helping the sinking mortal. After reading quickly through a chapter in his recipe book, one Christian began chanting his favorite "Getting Mortals Out of the Swamp" slogan. "When your feet are sinking low, you would to dry land go, Jesus saves." But the poor mortal had muck in his ears and thought that the Christian had shouted something about "don't make waves." And he sank a little bit deeper. Another Christian stood tall and flailing a Pharisaic finger, declared in stentorian tones, "You dumb mortal, you turned left instead of right at the 4th swamp. You knew, but you wanted your own way. Now you're suffering the consequences." The sinking mortal, of course, was very glad to know that, but he sank a little bit deeper. Another Christian knelt and prayed to the Great Spirit, "O Great Spirit, make a tree fall 12 inches to the left of the poor mortal sinking in the swamp, that he might pull himself to safety and repent of his evil ways." But no tree fell. Another Christian strode to the edge and with an ivory smile said, "If you ever have any trouble getting out of the swamp, come up to my office and I'll be glad to talk it over with you." But the mortal was under a tight schedule at the moment, and his work was sucking him under, and he only sank deeper. Another Christian hurriedly collected a little branch and a log or two and began tossing them toward the poor mortal. Some went too far and others not far enough, and some sank while others caught in the overwhelming tree branches. Finally, he found a hollow log and filled it with proof text and tracts and a few whatnots. And with a mighty heave, the Christian tossed the missile, which hit the sinking mortal in the head, and he sank deeper still. Another Christian came to the theology feeds, and usually late. Considered strange by the rest, his main excuses for his seeming disinterest in the vital theological issues percolating in the theology pot were that he was either talking with a sinner or drawing a swamp map. And he was late again this time. But as soon as he learned the trouble, He ripped off his shirt and tossed aside his polished shoes. Grabbing a nearby rope, he tied one end around the tree and the other around himself. To the slack-jawed horror of the rest, he strode manfully into the muck. With difficulty, he finally reached the sinking mortal. Grasping the mortal's upstretched hands, he pulled with all his strength and managed to drag him to a nearby log. Clearing the mud from the wretch's eyes, he smiled and said, "I found the way. Come along with me." Let me ask you this. Who do you know that is stuck in the muck of the swamp of this world that you can begin to reach out to this week? Who do you know that needs to learn to trust the Lord? Who can you go to and say, if you would, "I found the way. Come along with me"? As you see, I think in too many churches today, we've got too many Christians sitting around the theological pot instead of wading into the muck to pull out the mortals who are stranded there. Let's face it, this world is nothing but a swamp full of muck. And there are souls around us that are stuck in it, who need our help getting out, who need us to come along with the gospel message and tell them, "I've found the way. Come along with me. Let me show you where to walk." I believe if we're honest with each other, we all know someone who's stuck and needs us to reach out, even wade into the muck if we need to get to them and pull them to safety and show them the way. Do you know of someone who needs your help today? I would encourage you to determine to go to them, share the gospel message with conviction, expect results, and reach out to them and tell them, "I've found the way. Come follow me. Come with me. And we'll walk the safe path out of here together."